Hi friend, we have a new website live, transfieldguide.com. There you can find episodes with show notes, our resource page, and links to both our Amazon wishlist and our PayPal donation. If you'd like to support the show, please consider a one-time or recurring donation. Every penny helps. The information and opinions presented in this podcast are based on research done at a particular point in time. The fields of medicine, surgery, psychology, etc. are constantly evolving as new studies and movements happen. Please take into account the year of any particular episode's publication, and as new information presents itself, we will do our best to release updated episodes on the topics. Listener discretion is advised for references to medical terminology of body parts. Unless otherwise stated, no one speaking on this podcast is a medical or legal professional and cannot provide medical or legal advice. Welcome to the Trans Field Guide. Today on the show I have Harper, a non-binary individual who uses they/them pronouns. Thank you for coming on the show.
Happy to be here.
One of the hardest things about being non-binary is there's no set place for you, you know? You kind of have to make your own gender because, like, you're not in one box or the other. You have to decide everything because for binary male and female trans people, there's a set path. Now, each transition is always different. So I will say that you go to therapy and then you get on HRT, and then if that's something you want, you have bottom and top surgery, and then you live your life as a transitioned trans person, whether you want to be out or stealth. That's something that's up to you, but for non-binary people, you're non-binary all the time. And most people don't get it, which is discouraging. People will forget your pronouns if you use ones other than he or she. I use personally they, them, but there's V and their, there's reclaimed its pronouns, there's all kinds of pronouns that are out there. So,
and of course you can't assume which ones any particular person's going to use because, for example, with the reclaimed its pronouns, I've known various non-binary people who, if you call them it, they are going to slaughter you.
Yeah. So usually reclaimed its is not something that you see commonly, but I have known a friend of a friend that has used its pronouns, and that was kind of odd to get used to, but that's what they wanted, and so that's what I was going to call them, because that's what you do when people tell you your pronouns. Using they/them pronouns, a lot of people try to do a lot of mental acrobatics. I remember telling somebody they started stumbling in the middle of their sentence trying to use my pronouns, and I'm like, friend, it's okay, like, just think of it as somebody you don't know the gender of. Like, when the pizza person is coming to the door, what do you say when they get there? Oh, they're here, and if it's really that hard, which I have mentioned this in a panel I did before when somebody was saying that, oh, well, excuse us for being bad at they/them pronouns because we grew up with a certain type of English and that was frowned upon. It's just like, well, if you have a problem with it, just, imagine there's a mouse in my pocket and then there's two of us. So, but yeah, they/them just makes me feel the most comfortable. I attempted he pronouns on my own, not really with other people, and it just didn't feel right. And of course, she never felt right because I was the same female at birth. And I don't know, just started using they pronouns and it felt the most comfortable for me.
You were saying that your kind of self-description of where you are on the gender spectrum is kind of like slightly left center. How do you feel about the perceived need to create a label for a person's specific point on the spectrum?
I think it's extremely important. A lot of people will say, oh, why do we all need all these new words? And, why don't we just call it one thing? And why even have non-binary in the first place? But having language to explain what you feel inside is extremely liberating. I remember the first time I heard the word non-binary and understood it as myself, and having a word to explain the confusion and sometimes pain and sometimes good things that I experience being this gender has been extremely helpful for me. I think language is so important. And so if somebody needs a label outside of what the big umbrella label is, I think go for it. Don't expect everybody to just know it off the bat, because, I mean, most people don't even know what non-binary is, but like if you're willing to explain it, and if that's something that's important to you, then absolutely.
Yeah, because I know that there's the, quote, Tumblr genders.
Yeah, I think that people make fun of and get irritated and scared of by things that they don't understand. And if you think about how enforced the gender binary is, especially in like the US, you would understand where that fear would come from, right? So like when you go to buy a razor, you know, do you buy the pink one or the blue one? You know, our world is very binary, which can be isolating, I think, for a lot of non-binary people, but explains why people are sometimes afraid of us, and people show fear in different ways, and sometimes it's anger and sometimes that's cynicism.
So, some questions from audience members from the Q&A panel. Do you identify specifically as transgender and non-binary, or just non-binary?
Me personally, transgender and non-binary, just because the definition of transgender is that you don't identify with what you were assigned at birth. And my gender identity is very different from binary female, so yes.
Do you aim to present as non-binary in your dress, hairstyle, name, etc.? And if so, how is this done?
So, again, our world is very binary. So things are associated with, you know, male, female, and it's like a very hard line, right? So trying to find the right in-between space sometimes is difficult. Sometimes you run one way into another. For me, I'm not pursuing HRT right now, so I have a very feminine outer appearance, so I try to make it more masculine as to become more androgynous. Passing, I guess, for me, looks like if I can confuse somebody, I guess. If they sir and man me in the same sentence, it's a good day. Cutting my hair short, wearing mostly men's clothes, although I do shop in both sections. I'm wearing more male cut clothing and stuff like that, things to kind of dress down how feminine my body is to become more androgynous. And then my name, I just kind of went through a list of gender neutral baby names and looked in a mirror and had somebody shout them at me until I found one that looked right.
Do you have a middle name, and is it non-binary as well?
Currently, no. I've struggled to find one that I've liked. Kind of funny that you mentioned that, because my dead name, middle name, starts with an E. So my initials would spell H-E-R, which is kind of hellish. So no, I don't have a middle name as of right now, but I am attempting to choose one. Just haven't found one that feels right.
For people who are curious about non-binary questions, who should they reach out to?
This is something that if you have access to a non-binary person, obviously that's going to be your best person to reach out to. A lot of these questions did come from congregation members of the panel that we did, but when I was there, they didn't really ask them, and I think it's just because they're nervous, because again, non-binary is just being trans in general is kind of like, oh wow, so encountering a non-binary person is new, so I think a lot of them were nervous about either offending me or they were just nervous in general. But don't be. I mean, obviously don't go up to a non-binary person and it's like, what's it like being non-binary? Like, obviously care about them as a person first and try to get to know them, but once you get to know a non-binary person, if you've got questions, be like, hey, you know, I've got some questions about being non-binary. I want to know what your experience is like. And if you don't feel comfortable answering them, of course, then that's fine. But here are my questions. Can you please help me understand? So I feel like the more we understand people, the less we have reactions out of fear.
And of course, try to avoid any questions involving genitalia.
Yeah, genitalia, not so much.
Even if you're good friends with a non-binary person or trans person in general, you usually don't want to open with what's between your legs.
Yeah.
Like,
if you wouldn't ask a person who isn't trans of the same relationship to you what their genitalia was like, then you probably wouldn't ask a trans person that.
This episode will be continued in a part 2 coming next week, so stay tuned. Like this episode? Tell someone about it. Resources referenced in this episode can be found in the show notes at transfieldguide.com. Stay safe, and remember that I'm proud of you.